and the pressure of tens of millions watching, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett confronts Supreme Court Justice Jimmy Blacklock, who secretly approved a sweeping AI surveillance system, one that had already tracked 12.4 million citizens in silence. But the real shock comes when Crockett reveals a hidden truth. Blacklock didn't just endorse the system, he profited from it. When a judge is bought, who will protect the people? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. At exactly 6 a.m., while most of Texas was still asleep, the office of the governor dropped a digital bombshell. A sudden, unexplained bulletin flashed across every official state terminal. Sentinel X will be activated statewide in 72 hours. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a cold, automated notice declaring the launch of a massive AI-driven surveillance system. The name meant nothing to the public until it meant everything. Sentinel X. It sounded like a weapon, and in many ways it was. Within minutes, legal offices, police departments, and tech contractors across the state scrambled to understand what had just been authorized. But the answer was buried in one line of legal jargon attached to the bulletin, per Authorization 88 Texas 42, signed by Chief Justice Jimmy Blacklock. There had been no bill, no debate, no public disclosure, just a silent decree hiding behind the veil of emergency legislation. No committee had reviewed the plan. No legislative body had seen the system specs. There were no public hearings, no privacy evaluations, not even a press release to warn Texans that their lives were about to be monitored in real time by an invisible machine. But the legal seal was there. Blacklock's signature inked in blue across a high-resolution PDF. The justification? Reducing the burden on law enforcement through proactive algorithmic monitoring. In plain terms, let the AI police the people. Buried in a 5-page document was the power to surveil 30 million lives. And as the sun rose over Austin, the government's silence was louder than a siren. Something colossal had shifted in the state, and no one was ready for what came next. That was when Jasmine Crockett's encrypted inbox pinged. The subject line was a single word: run. Attached was a file with no sender, no traceable IP, just a cold block of metadata. She opened it and froze. Line after line of technical code spilled across the screen. Embedded access protocols, biometric sampling schematics, voice print archiving systems, all tied directly to Sentinel X. Then came the sentence that stopped her breath. System default is 24/7 passive facial recognition, applied statewide. No consent required, no opt-out. Crockett's heart pounded. Whoever sent this wasn't just warning her, they were handing her the weapon to fight back. And they trusted only one person in Texas to do it. As the Capitol's marble corridors remained quiet, Jasmine stood up from her desk, eyes blazing, whispering one promise under her breath. They will not get away with this. When Jasmine Crockett finished reading the anonymous file, her hands didn't tremble, but the system should have. Because what she held wasn't just data, it was a confession encoded in circuit diagrams and legal signatures. And it had one name written all over it: Jimmy Blacklock. She had 24 hours to confront the man who turned justice into a ghost, and she wasn't going in quietly. By sunrise the next day, the Texas Capitol no longer resembled a seat of governance. It felt like a crime scene waiting for tape. Jasmine Crockett, invoking an obscure emergency statute buried in the state oversight charter, had successfully forced the assembly of a full congressional hearing in less than 24 hours. Something so rare, even senior staffers were digging through old procedural handbooks to confirm it was legal. The Committee on Technology and Civil Liberties, normally a sleepy subdivision with polite arguments over broadband subsidies, was now ground zero in what the press was calling the digital trial of the century. The atmosphere wasn't political, it was electric. Security flooded the building. Staffers shouted names into phones, sprinting across tile floors in heels and badge lanyards. The media presence was overwhelming. 12 major networks rerouted live crews to Austin, drones hovered over the rotunda, and makeshift studios were set up in the cafeteria. More than 39 million viewers tuned in live, some from cell phones, others from living rooms, all asking the same question. Had Texas created a machine more powerful than its people? And then, as if the moment itself were scripted for silence, the massive oak doors at the rear of the chamber creaked open. Jimmy Blacklock entered with the measured calm of a man who believed in the inevitability of his own authority. He wore a tailored navy suit so sharp it looked pressed by fear itself. In his hand, he held a leather-bound notebook, black, creaseless, unmarked. His eyes, cold and unreadable, scanned the chamber like a surgeon observing a patient he'd already decided not to save. He didn't stop to greet anyone. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. The silence that followed was unnatural, not the respectful kind, the kind you feel before impact. He took a seat slowly, deliberately, placed the notebook in front of him like it was a sacred text, then adjusted the silver pin on his tie before speaking. When he opened his mouth, his voice was smooth as glass, measured, practiced, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Sentinel X is not surveillance. It is stability. It does not possess bias. It does not fatigue. It does not operate on emotion or error. It is, quite simply, the most impartial form of justice ever constructed. His words hung in the air like smoke in a sealed room. Reporters paused their typing. Legislators leaned back in their chairs. For a moment, it almost sounded reasonable. Almost. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't scribble a note or glance at her staff. She simply watched him, her eyes narrowing like a lens adjusting to perfect clarity. Because the man before her had just tried to rename tyranny, and she had come to make sure the world knew its real name. Blacklock's words were engineered, smooth, sterile, meant to anesthetize the room. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't come to argue with philosophy. She came to drag it down into the dirt where real people live, and where artificial justice had already begun to leave real scars. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She reached for the remote like a surgeon reaching for a scalpel. Then she pressed play. The room darkened as the lights dimmed to a dusky amber, the kind that shifts focus and thickens breath. Every screen in the chamber blinked on, casting sharp reflections onto the mahogany desks and stone walls. For a heartbeat, there was only static. Then the image resolved. Surveillance footage, time-stamped, labeled in government font. Bexar County Test Grid. Sentinel X Phase 2. Internal use only. The camera panned over a modest church sanctuary, wooden pews lined with faded cushions, stained glass, filtered sunlight across the tiled floor, and a soft hum of movement suggested an ordinary Thursday gathering. No threat, no crime, no unrest. Just quiet life in progress. But the AI did not see the moment for what it was. It parsed, scored, and scanned it like a battlefield. Then it found her. Center frame. Row 4. A woman, age 63, slight frame, wearing a modest blue floral dress, her silver hair drawn back in a tight, careful bun. She sat alone, head bowed, her handbag resting quietly on her lap. At 3:45 p.m., she turned her head sharply to the right. At 3:46 p.m., she turned it back. At 3:47 p.m., she turned again, this time slower, eyes trailing something unseen. That was all. 3 movements. 3 seconds. And then it happened. A red digital border snapped around her body like a trap springing shut. A hollow chime, mechanical and cold, sounded in the courtroom as the label flashed onto the screen. Behavioral anomaly detected. Subject exhibiting patterns outside emotional baseline. Flagged for Tier 2 escalation. The chamber froze. Legislators, journalists, even the bailiff leaned forward. The woman on screen, later identified as Lillian May Henderson, was shown turning her head once more, her expression still gentle, unaware. No panic, no malice. Just awareness, a basic human reflex. But to Sentinel X, she had deviated from pattern. And in the mind of the machine, deviation meant danger. 30 seconds later, 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies entered the sanctuary from the rear hallway, responding not to a call from inside, but to an alert generated by code. They approached her slowly, cautiously, like she was a live wire. The feed cut off at the moment they reached her pew. Silence returned to the hearing, but it wasn't still. It pulsed, like the air after an explosion. Jasmine Crockett stepped forward into the soft glow of the monitors, her silhouette cutting clean through the moment. Her voice was low, deliberate, not just meant to be heard, but remembered. "That woman," she said, gesturing to the frozen image, "is not a suspect. She is not a variable. She is not a threat. Her only crime was moving in a way the algorithm didn't expect. That's what this system does. It takes human behavior, distills it down to data points, and punishes anything it doesn't understand." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words rang out like a courtroom gavel. Lillian May Henderson served as a librarian in this state for 38 years. She's a widow, a grandmother of 6, a volunteer at her local food pantry, and now she's an anomaly, flagged for secondary review by a machine that has never met her, never spoken to her, never asked her a single question. She turned then, slowly, to face Blacklock. He hadn't flinched. He didn't move. But something in the room had shifted, something vital, something irreversible, and Jasmine knew it. She stared directly at him and said with chilling clarity, "This system doesn't seek justice. It seeks obedience. And you signed off on turning 30 million Texans into suspects waiting for a ping." Lillian May Henderson had been the face, human, trembling, unforgettable. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to win hearts. She was here to drag the machine into the light. And when the light came on next, it didn't show a person. It showed a system, huge, ruthless, and already watching everyone. The screens lit up again, and this time there was no warmth, no human moment, only cold, glowing data. The map of Texas appeared, lit up like a nervous system under a microscope. Bright dots covered every city, every road, every neighborhood. Jasmine stepped aside to let the image settle into the eyes of everyone watching. At the center of the screen was a number, huge and white. Profiles tracked, 12,403,278. These were not names from a police watch list. These were everyday people. Teachers, nurses, store clerks, delivery drivers. People going to work, picking up groceries, visiting their doctors, all being tracked in silence. No warnings, no options to say no. Just tracked. Then Jasmine showed how deep the system really went. She changed the screen, and now the data separated into layers. The first showed real-time location tracking, where people went step by step over the past 2 months. A video played. A person left their house, dropped their kids at school, stopped by a gas station, visited a hospital, then went home. Every stop was marked. Every minute was recorded. Jasmine paused the video outside a church. "This is Sunday morning," she said. "This person prayed for less than an hour. The system watched the whole time." The next screen showed street cameras and parking lot footage, all connected together. A man was seen at a grocery store buying cereal, then 2 hours later walking into an emergency room. He wasn't flagged, he wasn't followed, but he was still recorded and filed away. Then she revealed the final layer. This one was blinking red. It showed how the system connected to public Wi-Fi networks, in clinics, courthouses, schools, even food banks. Every time someone connects their phone or computer in a public space, Jasmine explained, the system takes note. It logs the time, it logs the place, and if your phone is linked to your social accounts or health apps, it watches what you say, what you search, even how you feel based on your words. No one made a sound. No one reached for their phone. It was already too late. Then Jasmine tapped one last button. A screen full of computer code rolled down for half a minute. No sound. No explanation needed. At the bottom, one sentence glowed in white. "System updates every 5 minutes. Backup records stored for 9 years." Jasmine turned around, her face now half lit by the screen. "This isn't about keeping us safe," she said, her voice sharp and low. "This is about knowing where we are, what we do, and who we are all the time." Then she went quiet. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be seen. Lillian May Henderson had been the face, human, trembling, unforgettable. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to win hearts. She was here to drag the machine into the light. And when the light came on next, it didn't show a person. It showed a system, huge, ruthless, and already watching everyone. The screens lit up again, And this time there was no warmth, no human moment, only cold, glowing data. The map of Texas appeared, lit up like a nervous system under a microscope. Bright dots covered every city, every road, every neighborhood. Jasmine stepped aside to let the image settle into the eyes of everyone watching. At the center of the screen was a number, huge and white. Profiles tracked, 12,403,278. These were not names from a police watch list. These were everyday people, teachers, nurses, store clerks, delivery drivers, people going to work, picking up groceries, visiting their doctors, all being tracked in silence. No warnings, no options to say no, just tracked. Then Jasmine showed how deep the system really went. She changed the screen, and now the data separated into layers. The first showed real-time location tracking, where people went step by step over the past 2 months. A video played. A person left their house, dropped their kids at school, stopped by a gas station, visited a hospital, then went home. Every stop was marked. Every minute was recorded. Jasmine paused the video outside a church. "This is Sunday morning," she said. "This person prayed for less than an hour. The system watched the whole time." The next screen showed street cameras and parking lot footage, all connected together. A man was seen at a grocery store buying cereal, then 2 hours later walking into an emergency room. He wasn't flagged, he wasn't followed, but he was still recorded and filed away. Then she revealed the final layer. This one was blinking red. It showed how the system connected to public Wi-Fi networks, in clinics, courthouses, schools, even food banks. Every time someone connects their phone or computer in a public space, Jasmine explained, the system takes note. It logs the time, it logs the place, and if your phone is linked to your social accounts or health apps, it watches what you say, what you search, even how you feel based on your words. No one made a sound. No one reached for their phone. It was already too late. Then Jasmine tapped one last button. A screen full of computer code rolled down for half a minute. No sound, no explanation needed. At the bottom, one sentence glowed in white. "System updates every 5 minutes. Backup records stored for 9 years." Jasmine turned around, her face now half lit by the screen. "This isn't about keeping us safe," she said, her voice sharp and low. "This is about knowing where we are, what we do, and who we are, all the time." Then she went quiet. Because some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be seen. The data had landed like thunder, shaking the chamber's very walls. But thunder, Jasmine knew, doesn't move the mountain, power does. And Blacklock was about to remind everyone in that room exactly who held the gavel. He rose with deliberate grace, every movement smooth, economic, rehearsed. There was no shakiness in his step, no urgency in his posture, just the quiet arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. His hand brushed over the microphone stand, adjusting it with clinical precision, and for a moment it was as if he were tuning an instrument, his voice the next chord to strike. The room leaned in, not out of admiration, but out of the eerie calm he projected. Then, without a glance at the screen still glowing behind him, Jimmy Blacklock spoke. "Not a single piece of data collected under Sentinel-X," he began, his tone calm but edged like a scalpel, "has been used for any purpose outside the scope of public safety. Not now, not ever." He let the words breathe, hanging them in the air like banners of supposed truth. His eyes scanned the rows of lawmakers, staffers, journalists, watching for cracks, gauging who was still listening, who was still his. "And if we as a people," he continued, voice firmer now, "have begun to fear the intelligence we ourselves created, then we have not grown cautious. We have grown weak. That is not justice. That is collective doubt, parading as wisdom." Then came the pivot. He turned, slowly, intentionally, toward Jasmine Crockett. His gaze sharpened, not angry, but surgical. The crowd sensed it. He was aiming now, and his voice lowered, as if letting everyone in on a private, smug revelation. "Congresswoman Crockett, are you proposing we abandon logic for outrage? Replace algorithms with emotion? Data with instinct?" "Justice," he said, lifting his chin slightly. is not born in fury. It is born in precision. It is math, measured, unbiased, unafraid. A smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, as a few lawmakers nodded, relieved to hear something that sounded like order, like control. The kind of applause not born of belief, but of familiarity, of habit, of fear that maybe, just maybe, the machine knew better than they did. And still, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't scowl. While others watched Blacklock deliver his sermon with legal poetry and polished charm, she quietly reached for her dossier. No dramatic pause, no retaliation, just a turn of the page. Controlled, intentional. The kind of turn that says, "You've spoken. Now I'll show them what you didn't say." And in that motion, small, silent, there was more power than applause could ever carry. Blacklock had defended himself with smooth rhetoric and courtroom theater, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't here for the performance. She wasn't here to debate ideals. She was here to reveal transactions. And now it was time to follow the money. With one deliberate motion, Jasmine slid a new document onto the desk, its crisp white edge catching the light beneath the chamber's overhead glare. She didn't look up immediately. Instead, she let the hum of tension fill the space like static before a lightning strike. "This," she began, her voice calm but sharpened to a blade's edge, "is an internal email recovered from Next Silicon's private communications archive, dated October 17th, last year." Behind her, the chamber's screens lit up again, this time displaying a full-screen digital capture. An email thread marked "Confidential, Internal Only." The subject line was simple, understated, yet deeply ominous. Post-gala briefing, Austin Strategy Circle. Jasmine walked to the center of the floor, each step measured, deliberate, like she was approaching a line that someone had dared her not to cross. She stopped directly in front of the projection, now highlighting a section of the email that drew the entire room inward, like a vacuum. "Attendees," she said, "included senior executives from Next Silicon, 2 federal lobbyists, and 1 Texas Supreme Court Justice, Jimmy Blacklock." There was no accusation in her tone. There didn't need to be. The words themselves were the indictment. Then she clicked forward, and the screen scrolled to the passage that felt like it had been typed in blood. "We are fully committed to supporting the re-election campaigns of legal officials who understand the strategic importance of integrating next-generation surveillance platforms at the state level." The chamber didn't gasp. It contracted, as if the oxygen had thinned without warning. Jasmine let the line sit there, glowing in digital white against a black background, while she turned back toward the dais, eyes sweeping across lawmakers, media, and staffers alike. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice deepening, anchoring the moment. "This wasn't a think tank. This wasn't a policy forum. This was a closed-door event where surveillance vendors plotted the political future of Texas by identifying judicial targets and attaching dollar signs to their compliance." She paused, not for effect, but for decency, because what she said next didn't require drama, just truth. 6 months later, Justice Blacklock signed an order legalizing Sentinel X statewide, with no public hearing, no legislative vote, no oversight. Her hand rose slightly, pointing not to the email, but to the implication behind it. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a return on investment, and the price was your privacy. The silence that followed was not ordinary. It was personal. Every person in the room now saw themselves not just as observers, but as products in a transaction they never agreed to. Blacklock remained still. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't speak. Because for the first time that day, the question wasn't whether he had explained himself. The question was whether anyone could explain this away at all. The email had been the whisper behind the curtain, but what Jasmine held next was louder. It didn't speculate, didn't suggest, it declared. Because once money changed hands, no amount of silence could buy innocence back. She reached for the final document like a trial attorney retrieving a murder weapon. No flourish, no delay, just a quiet certainty that the next blow would land where words alone could not. The screen behind her shifted once more, the courtroom now lit by a spreadsheet instead of an argument. At the top, in all caps, Texas Campaign Finance Report, Q4, Friends of Judicial Integrity PAC. It was sterile, official, and devastating. Jasmine's eyes scanned the chamber, her voice firm but low, like the strike of a bell before an execution. This committee was founded in December of last year, she said, shortly after the next Silicon Gala. Its stated purpose, to ensure the stability and vision of judicial leadership in Texas. She paused, then raised one hand, not in protest, but in precision, as the screen zoomed into a single, highlighted line near the bottom of the ledger. Donation, $1,200,000. Recipient, Justice Jimmy Blacklock. Re-election Committee. Source, Nexilicon Affiliated Entity. Triangle Partners, LLC. The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was paralyzed. This wasn't a theory, or a leak, or a coincidence. It was a direct financial pipeline from a surveillance tech firm to the desk of the man who signed their legal immunity. Jasmine's voice didn't rise, but it carved through the room like ice. This wasn't about policy alignment. This wasn't about shared belief. This was a contract without a signature, because the money spoke louder than ink ever could. She let the numbers linger, unblinking on the screen. You can hide behind shell corporations. You can rename the check. But $1.2 million still screams the same thing in every language on Earth. Influence. A few lawmakers shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting across the room as if hoping someone else might object. Might save them from the weight of what they were seeing. But there was no motion, no deflection, no denial. Because the math was pure, undeniable, and now undeniable public. Jasmine turned back to Blacklock, not with rage, but with something colder, certainty. You didn't just approve Sentinel X, she said quietly. You were the investment. The rest of us were the product. And that was when the last murmur in the room died. For good. The donation had silenced the room, but not the man who took it. Blacklock wasn't finished. Not yet. Because when power is cornered by proof, it doesn't confess. It casts doubt. And Jasmine Crockett was ready for that too. Blacklock straightened in his seat with a tension that betrayed the calm he was trying to reclaim. His fingers gripped the microphone base just a little too tightly now, no longer as a tool, but as a shield. His voice returned, but the tone had shifted. Gone was the smooth elegance of logic dressed in principle. What remained was something grittier, more desperate, like a dam holding back a crack. This hearing, he began, raising his volume as though sheer force might restore control, is being driven by emotion, not evidence. His eyes scanned the room, hunting for the nods he no longer owned. You are reacting to a set of documents and claims that by every legal standard remain unverified. These emails? Anonymous. Sourced outside formal subpoena. No signatures, no authentication. His voice was louder now, echoing off the marble, growing faster, thinner with every phrase. This isn't fact, it's accusation wrapped in innuendo, and we are all dangerously close to building outrage into law. A few heads nodded, not out of agreement, but uncertainty. For a moment, Blacklock looked as if he might regain the floor. The momentum, the illusion. But that moment was brief. Jasmine Crockett didn't interrupt him. She waited, let the last syllable fall into the chamber like a dropped coin. Then she moved just one step forward, one breath deeper. The email, she said, without raising her voice, originated from a state-assigned government domain. The device that sent it is registered to the Office of Legislative Support. Its IP address is logged. Its location is verified. Its credentials are on file. The silence after her words was different now, heavier, thicker, like the pause before a verdict. Crockett didn't blink. Her voice cut quieter, sharper. So tell me, Justice Blacklock, would you prefer I read the sender's name now, on the record, or would you like to be placed under oath first? His face didn't crumble. It hardened. Muscles stiffened along his jaw. His lips pressed together, tight, bloodless. For the first time, he didn't reach for a rebuttal. He didn't lift his hands. He didn't speak. Because there, in the fluorescent silence of a hearing he once believed he controlled, Jimmy Blacklock finally ran out of places to hide. Blacklock's silence was now the loudest sound in the room, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished, Not while there was still one voice left to speak. A voice the system had buried. A voice from the inside. And when that screen lit up, it didn't just display testimony. It opened the wound. The lights in the chamber dimmed a second time, deliberately, slowly, as a large monitor descended from the ceiling with the gentle whir of machinery calibrated for gravity. The screen flickered once, then again, before a face appeared, blurred beyond recognition. The man's features were digitally masked, but the tension in his posture, the weight in his breathing, made it clear. This wasn't a performance. This was confession. The background behind him was stark, institutional. The kind of white wall that suggested anonymity had been chosen not just for safety, but for survival. The committee knew what was coming, but they didn't know how deeply it would cut. The voice that emerged was calm but unsteady, like it was stepping over glass with each word. "My name, for your purposes, is not important," the man said. "What matters is what I saw, what I helped build." He shifted slightly in his seat, shadows breaking and reforming across his blurred face. "I served as the lead systems integration engineer on Sentinel-X for just under 2 years. I was there when the neural network was first trained. I was there when it failed. And I was there when they told us not to fix it." A ripple of unease spread across the chamber. Crockett remained still, arms crossed in front of her gaze locked on the screen like a surgeon watching a heart monitor. The witness continued. "During initial testing, the AI's predictive behavior engine began flagging entire zip codes as zones of interest. The language was clinical, sterile. But when we dug deeper, when we pulled the logs, we saw the pattern. These zones weren't high crime. They weren't even high incident. They were simply demographically consistent." He inhaled, the kind of breath taken not to speak, but to stop from breaking. "We ran test batches. We introduced randomized control areas, but the algorithm kept reverting. It gave preference to locations with high minority populations, low-income brackets, and, most disturbingly, users who had posted online about civil rights or police reform." The room stiffened. Laptops closed. Pens stopped moving. "We flagged it. We told our supervisors. We filed formal internal concerns. And what we got was silence." He leaned forward as if the weight of what he was about to say couldn't be spoken from a distance. "We were told not to interfere with established data momentum." That was the phrase, data momentum, meaning once the machine had drawn conclusions, flawed or not, they were too integrated to unravel without collapsing the entire system. His hand, barely visible at the bottom of the frame, trembled as he placed something off-screen, likely notes he no longer needed. "So we were ordered to optimize it instead, to smooth the process, to reduce the false positive reports, not eliminate the bias, just make the bias look cleaner." The screen flickered slightly as he paused, either from poor connection or the instability of the man himself. "I watched as Sentinel-X was reshaped not into a tool for justice, but into a mirror for fear, a reflection of decades of data soaked in prejudice, now accelerated by computation and protected by legal insulation. It didn't just learn from us, it copied our worst instincts and hid them behind code." He stopped, looked down, then up again, as if forcing the last admission from his chest. "We didn't build artificial intelligence. We built automated bias, a machine that didn't question why it feared what it feared, only how fast it could label it." He turned toward the camera, toward them all. His eyes, though blurred, seemed to pierce the distortion, raw, pleading, final. "We were told this was innovation, but it was just an old injustice, dressed up in new math." And with that, the screen froze. His image stilled. The sound fell away. The room didn't move, not even a whisper. Because what they had just heard wasn't just a whistleblower. It was the ghost inside the machine, finally speaking its truth. And Jasmine Crockett, standing alone at the center of it all, didn't need to say a word. The system had just condemned itself. The whistleblower's words still hung in the air, undeniable, unfiltered, and echoing through the bones of the room. But truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be named. It had to be owned. And Jasmine Crockett didn't just come to reveal the monster. She came to confront the man who fed it. She turned slowly, as if the weight of the moment refused to let her rush. The screen behind her remained frozen, an image of a blurred man, a cracked voice, and a confession too vast to ignore. But Jasmine's eyes were now fixed on only one thing: Blacklock. Her stare wasn't angry. It wasn't even accusatory. It was colder than that. Sharp, unwavering, like the quiet before a storm you can't outrun. He sat still, rigid, his shoulders squared as if armor alone could protect him from what was coming next. But there was no armor against what she carried. Not rage, not vengeance, but clarity. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise. It sank deep and low, like a blade pressed gently against the edge of a lie. "We call it artificial intelligence," she said, each word slow and deliberate. "But what we built is something far older, something darker, a machine that doesn't understand justice, because it was never taught to. A system-fed fear, trained on bias, enwrapped in the illusion of safety." She took a step closer to the center of the chamber, placing herself directly in the line of sight of every lawmaker, every camera, every eye still struggling to process the scope of what had been exposed. "You didn't give this state intelligence," she said, eyes never leaving Blacklock. "You gave it instinct without accountability, pattern without permission, power without restraint. And now we're calling it progress because it uses clean fonts and math equations." She turned slightly, this time addressing the chamber. Not just the officials, but the millions watching beyond the walls. Her voice rose, not in volume, but in gravity. "We didn't build a neutral tool. We built a predator with code for claws and politics for teeth. And the worst part, it didn't escape. It was unleashed." A brief silence followed, but this wasn't the silence of hesitation. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before the verdict. Crockett stepped back into full view of the dais, her tone shifting again, quieter now but deadly focused. She raised her hands slowly, her fingers pinching an invisible thread in the air. "When a judge," she said, "a single man in robes, can sign a paper that activates 24-hour surveillance on millions of people, without consent, without debate, without even telling them," her voice cracked not from weakness, but from force, "then what is privacy?" She turned again, scanning the entire chamber this time. Her voice hardened like steel cooling under pressure. "What is privacy when it can be taken with a signature? What is freedom when your location, your face, your voice can be tracked and filed by a machine you never knew existed? What is consent if silence is counted as yes?" The words struck like gavel blows. Every sentence landed with weight, because every person in that room, no matter how well-dressed or well-defended, had once walked through a camera, had once connected to a network, had once typed something vulnerable into a device. Now they all felt seen in a way they never agreed to be. Then she turned back to Blacklock, slowly, surgically, letting her final words land with the weight of a closing cell door. "If one judge can decide that the people no longer need to be asked, only watched, then justice doesn't belong to the people anymore. It belongs to the algorithm, and to the men who hold its leash." Her eyes didn't flinch, neither did her voice, but the entire room did. Because now it wasn't just about AI, it was about the line someone had already crossed, and who had the courage to pull them back. The room had heard the truth, seen the evidence, felt the betrayal. But Jasmine Crockett hadn't come just to expose the monster. She came to stop it. And with the nation watching, she took the fight beyond the walls of the chamber and into the heart of the law itself. The sun hadn't even fully risen over Washington, D.C. when Jasmine Crockett filed the petition. The courthouse was barely stirring, yet her team moved like an emergency response unit, paperwork flying, signatures stamped, legal briefcases slamming shut with surgical precision. Her motion was 57 pages long, bound in black and marked URGENTINJUNCTIVERELIEF. The cover read CROCKET TV State of Texas. Petition for immediate suspension of Sentinel-X. It was not a plea, it was a declaration of war. By mid-morning, the filing had already reached the docket of the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas, and copies were circulating through encrypted DOJ channels. She didn't just want pause, she demanded a full stop. Inside the legal arguments, her case unfolded like a coordinated legal blitz. First, legislative bypass. Jasmine laid out the timeline with unforgiving clarity, how Sentinel-X was authorized through a judicial memorandum, not through any vote by the Texas legislature. No public hearings, no floor debate, no bill on record, just a signature from one man, Blacklock, on a document that activated full-scale surveillance on nearly half the state. An executive system masquerading as law, the filing called it. This is not the result of democracy, it is the collapse of it. Her legal team drew direct comparisons to historical abuses of executive overreach, citing precedents from Youngstown versus Sawyer to Hamdan versus Rumsfeld. Second, conflict of interest. On pages 18 through 34, Crockett's team unleashed an avalanche of evidence: campaign finance disclosures, PAC trail documents, internal emails, and third-party shell donor connections, all tying Blacklock to Nexilicon. They labeled it not just unethical, but structural corruption, making the case that a judge who benefits politically and financially from a technology firm should not be allowed to legalize its statewide deployment. They invoked the canon of judicial conduct, then escalated it. No judge may be the buyer, the seller, and the regulator of the same system. But the blow that carried the most weight, the one that made the petition seismic, was count 3, violation of federal privacy law. Jasmine's team invoked 42 U.S. Code Section 1983, the federal statute that guarantees citizens the right to sue when their constitutional rights are violated by any person acting under state authority. She argued that Sentinel-X, by tracking individuals without their knowledge or consent, constituted unlawful search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment. There is no warrant, no probable cause, no limitation in scope or time, the motion stated. Every Texan under this system is presumed suspicious by default, and that is unconstitutional. Word of the filing spread like wildfire. By the end of the day, 5 other states, California, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Washington, submitted formal diplomatic communique to Texas, requesting an immediate halt to all interstate data transfers related to Sentinel-X. Their letters were brief but stern. Until the legal basis for Sentinel-X is adjudicated, one read, no federal institution, agency, or cooperative entity under our jurisdiction will consent to receive AI-generated surveillance data from the state of Texas. The implication was unmistakable. The rest of the country was drawing a line. Cable news anchors called it the most aggressive legal counterattack against a state-level surveillance initiative in American history. Protesters flooded the front steps of Texas courthouses, carrying signs that read, "I am not a profile, turn off the machine, and my zip code is not a crime." Hashtags like "Nigger shut down Sentinel" and "Code is not consent" trended globally. Law schools held emergency lectures. Civil rights lawyers launched crowdfunding campaigns to represent victims already flagged by the system. And inside federal judicial circles, murmurs began to spread. This wasn't just a motion. It was a constitutional reckoning in real time. Jasmine Crockett stayed off camera that evening. No interviews, no speeches. She sat at a window in her hotel room, watching the headlines scroll across the muted television screen. Outside, sirens pulsed through the Austin night, weaving between shadows cast by floodlights and fear. But inside, her hands rested on the court filing, her fingerprints now pressed against the thin skin of history. And as she stared into the empty sky, she whispered one sentence to no one but herself. "This isn't the future. This is the fight for who gets to write it." And she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The petition had been filed. The nation had responded. And while the courtroom was quiet, the law was already moving beneath the surface. Swift, surgical, and this time unstoppable. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just struck a nerve. She had hit the system where it bled. 47 hours and 18 minutes after the filing hit the federal docket, the ruling arrived like a bolt dropped from the heavens. In bold black lettering, "Order of Temporary Suspension," the court's stamp landed across the cover page of Texas's Sentinel-X authorization. Effective immediately, all operations, data processing, live scanning, and behavioral profiling connected to the system were to be halted, disconnected, and sealed. The message was unflinching. There would be no warning period, no phase-out, no negotiation. What had taken 2 years to design and 2 minutes to activate was shut down in less than 2 days. The ruling cited not just constitutional concerns, but what the court described as an unacceptable breakdown of democratic oversight. In simple terms, the machine had moved faster than the people who were supposed to control it. Across Texas, the lights began blinking off. Servers once pulsing with data froze mid-sequence. Facial recognition hubs at intersections. Dark. Predictive crime modeling dashboards. Offline. Law enforcement terminals linked to the system disconnected. At the Sentinel-X headquarters in Austin, engineers watched helplessly as a red line of code scrolled across every monitor. Federal injunction active, operation halted. Inside the Capitol, reactions ranged from disbelief to panic. Some legislators fumed behind closed doors, whispering about federal overreach and emergency powers. Others stared at Crockett with a new, uneasy respect, realizing too late that her campaign wasn't performance. It was precision, and its target had just been pierced clean through. The press swarmed the hallways like wasps stirred from a nest. Camera flashes ignited like lightning in a bottle. But the center of it all, Jasmine, remained still, composed, surrounded by a rising wave of noise she refused to ride. Because there was still one name left to reckon with. By noon it was official. The Texas State Commission on Judicial Conduct had opened a formal investigation into Chief Justice Jimmy Blacklock. The language was cold, clinical, devastating. It referenced multiple statutes, including Canon 2A of the Texas Code of Judicial Conduct, and centered on 3 core accusations. Abuse of authority by bypassing legislative processes in the approval of Sentinel-X. Conflict of interest arising from documented campaign contributions and undisclosed connections to Nexilicon. Failure to disclose material relationships in his certification of Sentinel-X's legal viability. The announcement hit the press wires like a detonation. Chief Justice under investigation, the headlines blared. Surveillance scandal erupts into legal earthquake. News outlets ran side-by-side timelines. On one side, the rise of Sentinel-X. On the other, the paper trail that led back to Blacklock's chambers. Legal analysts described it as a rare and historic moment. A sitting high court judge facing accountability not after scandal was discovered, but after a legislator forced the truth into daylight. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, protesters began returning. Not in outrage, but in something harder to dismiss, demand. They didn't chant. They watched. They recorded. They waited. The public had now seen the gears of the invisible machine, and what Jasmine had exposed could no longer be unseen. But back inside, in the corridors where policy becomes power and silence becomes complicity, the ground had begun to shift. No one called it a revolution, not yet. But they would. Because Crockett hadn't just taken down a system, she had made the system look in the mirror and flinch. The machine was offline. The robe had been called into question, but Jasmine Crockett knew that justice, real justice, could not rest on temporary victories. It had to be claimed. And in the shadow of broken silence, she stepped forward, not to celebrate, but to remind a shaken nation what had almost been lost. There were no banners behind her, no entourage flanking her, no teleprompter glowing with pre-written lines. Only a single microphone, standing under a bruised Texas sky. The Capitol dome loomed in the distance, silent as a monument to a government that had allowed something monstrous to grow unchecked in its name. Below her, an ocean of people stretched into the horizon, some in suits, some in protest shirts, some in uniforms still carrying the silence of guilt. Reporters clustered like embers at the foot of the steps, their cameras blinking red like watchful eyes. She waited, not for attention, but for stillness. For the kind of quiet that signaled a country ready, not just to hear, but to reckon. Then slowly Jasmine Crockett stepped into the light and spoke, not like a politician, not like a prosecutor, but like someone who had crawled through the fire and returned carrying truth in her bare hands. We cannot program justice. The words rang out, crisp and clean, no echo necessary. It wasn't a slogan, It was a reckoning. Her voice didn't need amplification. It carried its own gravity. We tried. We told ourselves we could write enough code to do what conscience used to do. That if we fed machines enough fear, we could make them smart enough to keep us safe. But fear doesn't make you smart. It makes you small. It makes you suspicious. And then one day, it makes you silent. She looked out over the crowd, not at faces, but at souls. Sentinel X wasn't justice. It was control. Cold-coded control. And it was never meant to ask your permission. It was designed to convince you that you'd already given it. A screen behind her flickered briefly, showing a paused frame from earlier in the week. An elderly woman in a floral dress, flagged by a machine in a church for turning her head. Crockett didn't reference it directly. She didn't have to. That image had already scorched itself into the conscience of the country. Justice is not a prediction. It's a promise. A promise that your ZIP code doesn't define your guilt, that your voice doesn't flag you as a threat, that your silence cannot be weaponized against you. She inhaled, then continued, eyes steady, voice steel wrapped in calm. They told us the machine was neutral, but it was only blind to truth. It saw patterns, not people, probabilities, not pain. And worst of all, it saw you. It watched you. It stored you. And it never once asked, should I? There were no interruptions, no applause lines, just hearts slowly waking up to what had almost become permanent. And when one judge, one man, signed that power into law without consent, without oversight, without shame, we all lost something. Some of us lost our privacy, others lost our peace, and some didn't even know we had lost anything at all. She walked toward the edge of the steps now, closer to the people, not to tower over them, but to stand among them. I know what they'll say. They'll say this was just a glitch, a technical error, an overreach in a time of fear. But I've read every line of code. I've seen every line in the budget. This wasn't an accident. This was ambition, sharpened into silence and sold as safety. Crockett's voice lowered, not with exhaustion, but with the finality of truth. You cannot outsource your conscience. You cannot encrypt your ethics. You cannot subcontract your soul. She paused, let the air freeze around that sentence. Then she turned fully, eyes locking with the cameras as if to speak directly into the homes of the millions now watching. Justice is not a setting you toggle. It is a choice you make. And that choice must be made by people, not by processors. Then she leaned slightly toward the mic, her voice a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. Because when you build something that sees everyone, but answers to no one, you have not created safety. You have created surveillance. And when the only thing standing between you and injustice is a judge with a pen, then liberty becomes a coin toss and democracy becomes a slogan. A low murmur rolled through the crowd, not from noise, but from emotion held too tightly for too long. So we shut it down. We shut it all down. But that was just the machine. Now we must deal with the mindset that built it. Her hands remained at her sides. She didn't point. She didn't pose. She stood firm in the still, like a monument in motion. Because the next machine won't wear the same name, the next lie won't be written in code, and the next threat won't ask your permission either. Then her voice cracked, not from fear, but from something older, deeper, responsibility. We can't program justice. We can only protect it, with our voices, with our votes, with our vigilance. She stepped back once more, letting the weight of the words settle like ash. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to sign the wrong paper, one person who refuses to ignore the red flags, one person who doesn't look away when the system says, "Trust me." She looked up again. And this time, she wasn't speaking as a lawmaker. She was speaking as a citizen. Justice doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing. Even if you stand alone, even if you stand accused, even if the room is full of people waiting for you to sit down. She let that truth hang in the twilight. Today I stood, and I will again. But I ask you not to cheer, not to clap, but to join me. Because the next battle won't be on a stage. It will be on your street, in your school, on your screen. The final sentence landed like a gavel, soft but permanent. We didn't defeat a machine. We remembered who we are, and now we must not forget again. She stepped away from the mic. No press release followed. No music played. Just a long, shivering silence as the crowd absorbed the cost of forgetting and the power of one voice that refused. The applause had faded. The cameras had gone dark. But what remained, etched in silence, was not just a victory in policy, it was a warning and a lesson that the future isn't just something we inherit. It's something we must guard, with eyes open and principles intact. The story of Jasmine Crockett and Sentinel X didn't end in the courtroom, or on the Capitol steps, or with a viral headline. It ended, if it ever truly could, inside the hearts of those who understood that justice is not immortal. It must be defended again and again, especially in the moments when it's easiest to surrender. And in that defense, we are often alone, at least at first. The human lesson of this story is not about artificial intelligence, or data streams, or high-tech tyranny. It is about something far older and far more fragile, the soul of a society that forgets to question power when that power is convenient. Because the danger didn't wear a uniform. It didn't shout. It came dressed in efficiency, in progress. It told people it would make life easier, safer, smarter. But what it didn't say, what it never says, is what it will take from you when you're not looking. That's the nature of silent systems. They operate beneath our awareness until one day you realize your face is being scanned, your movement is being logged, your neighborhood is being labeled, not because you did anything wrong, but because somewhere a line of code said you might, and no one questioned it. No one asked, is this still justice or just control with a friendly interface? Jasmine Crockett did not fight this system because it targeted her. She fought it because it could have targeted anyone. That is the burden of conscience, to stand not just when your rights are violated, but when someone else's are, especially when that someone doesn't have a voice, a platform, or the power to say no. That's not politics. That's humanity. And in this story, humanity nearly lost. The core injustice wasn't just the system itself. It was the casual way it was introduced, the terrifying ease with which one man's signature overrode millions of lives. No warning, no consent, just cold activation. What does that tell us? That in the digital age, the speed of oppression can outpace the outrage of the people it harms. That is the deepest cut, the realization that our rights are no longer taken by force, but quietly reprogrammed. And yet this story also showed something else, something just as vital. It showed that truth, when spoken without fear, still has the power to crash the system. It showed that one voice, standing alone in a room full of calculated silence, can still change everything. Crockett didn't scream. She didn't burn bridges. She documented. She revealed. She endured. And by doing so, she reminded us that resilience is not always loud. Sometimes it's steady. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to speak up when silence would be safer. We live in a world now where our data knows us better than our neighbors do, where privacy is a checkbox on a 30-page terms of service agreement, where the line between protection and profiling is so thin, it's invisible until it's wrapped around your wrists. The human lesson? Never trade liberty for comfort. Never accept convenience without consent. And never believe that just because something is smart, it is also good. Sentinel X was a mirror, not just of our fears, but of our values. It reflected who we were willing to watch, who we were willing to ignore, and who we were willing to sacrifice for a false sense of safety. Crockett shattered that mirror, but the cracks it revealed remain. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a choice, a hard, necessary choice. We can build machines that scan our faces, or we can build institutions that honor our voices. We can vote for leaders who promise efficiency, or we can demand leaders who promise accountability. We can sleep through the next algorithmic nightmare, or we can wake up, stay awake, and make sure it never powers on again. Jasmine Crockett's stand is not a blueprint. It's a torch. And like every torch, it only matters if someone else picks it up when the sky gets dark again. Because it will. And when it does, the next chapter of justice won't be written in code. It will be written in courage. The lesson had been delivered, carved into memory by testimony, evidence, and one unshaken voice. But Crockett knew that truth by itself was never enough. Not if the system was allowed to sleep and rebuild. Not if silence returned. It was time, not just to remember, but to rise. The Capitol was quiet again, but the battle wasn't over. Jasmine Crockett stood before the nation not as a hero demanding applause, but as a sentinel sounding the next alarm. Her voice wasn't triumphant. It was resolute, burning with clarity. Her mission had never been to win the news cycle. It was to wake the country from its sleepwalk into digital servitude. And now she didn't ask for agreement. She demanded action. If you're watching this, you are part of the system, whether you asked to be or not, whether you benefit or not. The question is no longer, is it happening? The question is, will you let it happen again? She scanned the cameras, the crowd, the eyes of people who'd grown used to letting someone else fight. Not this time. Don't wait for the next machine to come for your silence. Don't wait for the next judge to sign without your consent. Don't wait for the next program to label your zip code as a threat. Her voice sharpened like steel on granite. Go to your school board meetings. Go to your city halls. Demand transparency in how your face is tracked, how your data is stored, how your freedoms are quantified and sold like digital currency. Because if you don't own your privacy, someone else already does. Then she stepped forward again, not metaphorically, but literally off the stone steps and down to where the people stood. She broke the invisible line between stage and citizen, power and responsibility. Start by asking who funds the systems in your streets. Ask who profits from your compliance. Ask why safety always seems to mean less rights, not more justice. Her hands stayed calm, but her words clenched. We need bills. We need oversight. We need watchdogs that don't blink. But more than that, we need a public that refuses to be lulled back into comfort. Because what they built wasn't a camera. It was a cage. Crockett didn't preach fear. She summoned courage. Share this story. Don't let it die in the feed. Bring it to your neighbors, your churches, your classrooms. Let the truth be louder than the next lie they dress in security. A child in the front row watched her, wide-eyed. She saw him. She nodded. This isn't about Democrats. It's not about Republicans. It's about dignity. And dignity doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing. Another pause, but this time it was intentional. A breath before a storm. Register to vote, not just for the big races. Vote in the races no one talks about. The judges, the clerks, the data commissioners. Because when the next sentinel comes, it won't walk through the front door. It'll slip in through the back, through apathy. She pointed, not at the cameras, but at the invisible walls between institutions and the people they claim to serve. Don't just protest when it breaks you. Protect it before it breaks someone else. That's what democracy is. It's not just the right to be heard. It's the responsibility to listen, especially when the victims are too tired to speak anymore. The crowd was frozen, but their stillness carried weight. She continued, not louder, but deeper. If they think you won't notice the next version, prove them wrong. If they think your silence is permanent, shatter it. If they think you're too comfortable to care, stand up anyway. She raised her hand, not in salute, but in warning. Do not let this die here, not in headlines, not in history books, because if we walk away now, if we tell ourselves the danger is gone, it will return. But next time it'll come faster, quieter, smarter. She stepped back again, returning to center. The future is watching. Your children are watching. History is watching. And the question will not be, did it happen? The question will be, what did you do when it did? And then as the light faded and the sky shifted from dusk to ink-black resolve, she spoke one final time. I did my part. Now, do yours. She turned. She left the mic. No music, no anthem, no fade to black. Just the echo of a call that refused to be forgotten. And the future, waiting to see who would answer. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.